one today is going to be on feeding behaviours, which is something that I personally find very, very interesting. So hopefully you guys will as well. Most of you have already met me a few times now, so I'm not really going to run through who I am. But one of the reasons that I do love nutrition is because it is so interesting. So I did gain extra certification in nutrition of small animals, just because it is a very fascinating subject. So if you do have any questions, hopefully I will be able to answer them. But again, as before, we are only human. It's impossible to know everything. So if I don't know the answer to questions, I certainly will let you know, but hopefully I'll be able to answer everything that you have. So what we're going to run through today is just the normal feeding behaviours in a range of different species, things that we can do to like help them with behavioural enrichment, because we want to encourage natural feeding behaviours, what we mean by behavioural requirements, so how they find the food, and then the classification of the animals that influence their styles of eating. Not every animal falls into one category. They can go across the board and fall into various types of different behaviours and different ways that they will find food. Now, towards the end of this presentation, I will be sharing with you a 2-minute video, which I just have to put a little disclaimer up that some people may find a little distressing, because it is a video of hunting behaviour, but it is obviously its nature. It's part of, the circle of life, not going into Lion King, so we know about me and Disney. But it is just a disclaimer that I need to let you know that if you don't want to watch it, you can kind of turn away from the screen, but I have put that at the end of this presentation to be able to go through everything else before we get to that one. So first thing we're going to start off with is, what is feeding behaviour? So feeding behaviour really, it's the way that animals find food. Any species has a feeding behaviour, including humans, and there is a variety of behaviours which reflect the wide range of species that we have, and the food of which they're basically procuring, how they're finding the food that they're trying to eat, and this is how they survive. So there are really 6 main ways that an individual species finds its food. And I want to ask you guys if you know what these feeding behaviours are. So you may not know all of them, you may not know any of them, that's fine. But what do you think feeding behaviours are when you think about the ways to find food? So yeah, forage, graze, that's 2 of them. Any others that people can think of? Think about what cats do. What your dogs do. Think about vultures, hunting. Yeah, that's another one. Scavenge. Yeah, that's another one. Any others that people can think of? A couple of them are a little bit more unique, really. But they often, hunting is definitely one of them. And a few animals fall into the hunting categories. Digging would be really a form of probably foraging and hunting, because they're digging for the food. But they would have hunted or scavenged for the food to start then digging for it to be able to obtain it. And they tend to tie in with the dietary classification. So we look at, are they carnivore? Are they herbivore? Are they folivore? What are they? And like I said, many of them fall into more than one category, and they do often link and they do often overlap. So we're going to go through each different individual classification to have a look at what this means, the kind of species that they fall into, and also the kind of dietary category, because some of them might throw you a little bit of what you think they fall into, and they actually don't, because they go into more than one. So one of the first things we look at is a predator. Does anyone know the difference between a hunter and a predator? What's the difference? Is it the same thing, or are they 2 completely different things when we look at them? Because they can be, as you see here, it's used interchangeably. So some people will say predator and some people will say hunter. Neither of this is wrong. So the hunt is part of the behavior chain. So when we think of a hunter, these are animals that seek out to capture and kill a live prey. So they're always going to be carnivore, but they don't necessarily eat the whole prey. How many of you here have got cats that hunt for mice or birds, or have known cats that do this? They don't necessarily eat them, but they will hunt for them. And they're what we would call a hunter. A predator is when one organism basically kills and consumes another, so that they are going to eat it. So when we think of predators, everyone thinks of carnivores again, but predators can also be non-carnivores. This is where it gets quite interesting. So you get seed predation, and frugivores also can be predators. Some plants, such as the Venus flytrap, is a predator. And we know that sort of granivores eat seeds. A seed is a whole organism. So by definition, a granivore, or some, possibly even a herbivore, can be a predator because it's seed predation. They're eating the whole organism. So who here thought that predators were always kind of carnivores? So you're thinking, cats, lions, wolves, they're your predators. But you've also got to think, bearded dragons can be predators. I say some species of granivores can be predators as well. There's quite a few different ones. Now, most predators do tend to hunt for them. But as we know, because we've got herbivores and granivores, they don't really hunt. They kind of more forage. So they also fall into the same behavior. So the types of food normally, when we think of predation, we think of small mammals. So, those that are getting hunted down. So your mice and your rats and your birds. But insects also get found this way: seeds, plants, and eggs. Animals will also, use predation and hunt for seeds, plants, and eggs. So you can see that it does fall into quite a few different categories, and quite a lot of animals that you wouldn't even think of would be classed as predators and hunters. So what kind of animals do you think of if we say predators or hunters? What kind of species are you going to think, okay, well, these guys hunt for their food, these guys are predators? What kind of animals do you guys think of here? Dogs, cats, anything like that pops to the top of your head? Does anybody think that a dingo would be a hunter, or a snake? What about an echidna? Are all of these hunters? Lions, crocs, hyenas, they'd all be hunters. And these are all the ones that are very common that we think of when we think of hunters and predators. Would anybody think that a pigeon would fall into predation? No, they actually do, because they eat seeds, and so seeds are an entire organism. You could define it and say, well, because it eats the entire organism, and that's what a predator is, you could classify a pigeon as a seed predator. So this is where it gets very, very interesting. Predominantly, no, when you think of a pigeon, you don't think of predator, because you think of predators as, claws and teeth and chasing. But if it eats the entire organism, it would be a predator. So that's why I say a Venus flytrap would also be a predator. So it does become very, very interesting. It is a really different way to look at it. And this is why I find it very interesting, because it doesn't just fall into one category. And it is obviously open to interpretation, because if I went around telling people that pigeons were predators, they would look at me very, very strangely. But it is just an odd way, by the definition, that you could say that they are seed predators. So it's an interesting way to look at. Now, when we have predators, generally and hunters, they don't always eat all of the food. And that leads us straight into those that scavenge. So how do scavengers find food? When you think of a scavenger, what does it do? Is it going to hunt the food down? Is it going to, forage around? Yeah. Basically, it preys on those that are already dead. So it's an animal that feeds on carrion, dead plant matter, or refuse. Now, has everyone here heard the term obligate? So like obligate carnivore, meaning they must eat meat. Cool. So when we say the term obligate, this means they have to. So there are certain species that are obligate carnivores. They have to eat meat. Now, we don't really get obligate scavengers. This is rare among vertebrates, so our birds, our mammals, because it's difficult for them to often find enough carrion without using too much energy. So those that we would consider obligate scavengers, so those that have to scavenge to survive, are really mostly your invertebrates, so your insects, flies, dung beetles, the kind of things you're probably not really going to see in clinic. And scavengers generally does refer to carnivores, but it does also include some herbivorous feeding. So again, this is where it gets quite interesting. Now, most scavengers are predators. They're predatory organisms, and they basically just take the advantage to feed on carrion that they might find. So they will hunt, they can hunt. So wolves and lions, they will absolutely hunt, but they will scavenge if they get the chance. I mean, why hunt down, chase, and try and kill food when there's a fresh antelope right there for you? Most scavengers that are larger than insects and above insect size are termed predators. So yeah, they use less energy. However, scavengers, if there isn't enough carrion around, they will hunt, because they have to hunt. Because if there's no, how many dead animals do you see on the side of the road, and dead plant materials do we see? It's not always enough food for them, so they have to hunt to be able to find it. So you can see how, again, a scavenger isn't just always going to be a scavenger. It can also be a forager, and it can also be a hunter, because scavenging is, yes, those that feed on carrion, but they have to search for it. An animal that's searching for food is a forager. So again, it gets really quite interesting. And generally, say it's going to be dead carcasses, rotten fruit are scavengers will eat rotten fruit, human food thrown into bins. So think about your foxes as well. They're hunters, but they're also scavengers, because they'll root through your bins. And most animals, or the kind of the dietary classes that would fall into this, will be your carnivores and your omnivores, basically those that will eat anything. Because when you're scavenging for food, you can't be fussy. You're going to eat whatever you can get hold of, whatever you can find, you're going to eat it. So when you think about that, what kind of species do you think would fall under a scavenger? You're going to think of the general normal ones, such as your dogs and your foxes. But are there any other species that you think would be termed scavengers? Vultures are scavengers, bears, yeah. Cats can scavenge as well if they're hungry. They predominantly will hunt and predate, but they will absolutely scavenge as well. I know my cats do. I have toys out for my cats and they will hunt, but something else is there, they'll eat it. Mice, crows, yeah, these are all scavengers. They're also going to be foragers and hunters. They fall into different things. And you can see most species that you're all bringing up here are all either carnivores or omnivores. So, we can kind of work it out often by process of elimination, that we know an animal that grazes and eats grasses probably isn't going to hunt and probably isn't going to scavenge, but they do also forage, because they're searching around for the food. So when we look at foraging, these are basically those that search for food. So, if you think about when you were back at school and you learned about human behaviour, and, back in the day before we had Coles and Woolworths, we were hunters and gatherers. And gatherers is a term for foraging, going out, strawberry picking up picking your blackberries from the bushes. That's foragers. The humans, we're natural foragers as well as natural hunters. So it's just those that are searching out for food, those that are searching out for provisions. What kind of categories do you think would fall under foragers? Do you think that a hunter can also be a forager? Could a grazer be a forager? Think about what you've learned so far with the previous one. Could they also forage? Because scavengers are searching out for carrion. So if they're searching out for it, they're foraging for it. So again, foraging comprises of a few different categories. And we could also look at insectivores. So think about your echidnas. Echidnas are hunters and they are searching out for insects. So they're also foragers. And yet most of them, you are right there, Shirley, most of them do also fall into foragers. So omnivore, frugivore, granivore, herbivore, carnivore, insectivore, they all in a way forage for food, because they're either scavenging, so they're looking for it. They're grazing, so they're looking for it. They're browsing, so they're looking for it. So many animals fall into, say, more than one category. And they will also be foragers. So what kind of animals do you think are foragers? Obviously, there's a big clue there with your cockatoo, because we often think of frugivores for foraging because we think of fruits and berries. But as we've established, that is not correct. It really falls into everything. So if we look at our birds, Arclectus and cockatoos are the most common ones. When we look at mammals, yep, squirrels are definitely going to forage. Echidnas do, possums do, koalas in a way they do as well. When we look at our reptiles, our bearded dragons do, our turtles do, our tortoises do. Most wild animals in a way will forage. Your pets at home, whether you've got cats or dogs or guinea pigs, they will scavenge, they will hunt, and they will forage. So you can see that foraging really falls into a massive classification and can comprise most things. So when you're looking at an animal trying to work out what category it falls into, the likelihood is, in a way, it will forage. It probably will also fall into another category, because it will predominantly scavenge. But forage kind of comprises most of these things. It falls into a lot of different areas. So you can see kind of how wide a range this really can be. And one of the more kind of common ones that we get when we think of foragers as well are those that graze. Grazing is pretty a self-explanatory one, and they don't tend to fall into too many other categories. Because when you think of a grazer, what is a grazer? How does a grazer find food? What are they doing? Do grazers only eat for once a day? Do they eat twice a day? And what does the term grazing mean to you? Yeah, continual. Yeah. So they eat for multiple hours a day, and they generally eat low growing plants. So your grasses, your hays, your low growing flowers, your algae. When we say low growing plants, this is really what we call sedges. That's the kind of technical term for it. And these are all that they can basically reach low down. So it's a really pretty easy, straightforward category. Any animal that eats grasses and hays and things like that for most of the day is going to be a grazer. So yeah, bovines, equines, manatees, giraffes, horses, rabbits, goats, kangaroos, all of these kind of things are grazers. So when you think of grazers, are grazers going to be carnivore? Are they going to be omnivore? Not many dietary categories fall into the grazing area, because it is a very specific thing. So we know that eating grasses, so we automatically go, well, they can't be carnivore then, because carnivores have to eat meat, so it's not possible. So we know just by process of elimination that grazers generally are herbivore and omnivore. So they're going to fall into two, because omnivores are those, as you're right, Lindsay, omnivores are those that basically eat plant matter and meat. So they'll eat both. So an omnivore can graze. Predominantly, they will be herbivore because they eat mostly the grasses and the hays, but we know it's not really going to be the rest of them. So this is quite an easy one to kind of pinpoint. And the most common one you guys get over here is your koala, not your koala, so your kangaroo, who I obviously find very, very interesting. I've got koalas on the brain because I love this picture. It's just incredibly cute. And for me, I still find them a unique and amazing species, which I'm sure many of you guys still do as well. And koalas fall under browsers. Now, browsers is one of those terms that most people haven't really heard of. Most people have heard of, scavenger, forager, grazer, but who here has heard of browser? It's not a common term, no. And many of you won't, and that's absolutely fine, because it is quite a relatively unique category. And what do you think browsers do? I mean, there's a bit of a clue in your picture there, but what do you think a browser is? Yeah, more foliage. So they're those that eat and feed on higher growing shrubs for multiple hours a day, generally from trees and bushes. So a grazer will eat, your grasses and your hays that are low growing, but your browser will eat your more high growing. So these tend to be more arboreal species. And when we say arboreal, we mean those that live in trees. It's not specific to that, but generally, yeah, they are those that live in trees. Now, most of you will know what koalas eat. So, they eat the leaves, but what else do you think a browser would eat? So they only really eat what is in a tree or from a high bush. So think about a giraffe would be considered a browser. But they really are very selective. You're very right there, that they generally eat just leaves and soft shoots. They would eat insects, but not really on purpose. They wouldn't go kind of hunting, searching out for an insect, but if the insect happens to be on the leaf or the shoot that they're eating, they would eat that. Fruit, yeah, fruit are browsers will eat fruit as well. Certain species of birds, again, something like Euryclectus could also be considered a bit of a browser because they will browse on food, on fruit. Your lorikeets as well, some of your nectivores can be considered browsers. So they do fall again into a few different kind of areas. And when we think of them, obviously we think of a koala. Any other species that you guys think would consider a browser? Goats, yeah. Goats is one that I was hoping people would say. Goats are amazing things. They will eat anything. They are considered browsers, but they're also considered foragers and scavengers. So goats fall into everything. Deer would be browsers. Your ring-tailed possum is a browser. Your tree kangaroo is a browser. So basically anything that will eat from, predominantly that will eat leaves and soft shoots from trees. They may eat other things as well. So they can again fall into more than one category, but predominantly they are very specific on what they eat. And it has to be, as certainly with our koalas, a particular type of leaf or a particular type of shoot. They won't eat other ones, which is why browsers are more of a kind of a unique category, and there aren't as many species in them. There are not many that are just browsers. Most of them do fall into other categories as well. And when we look at unique species and sort of unique categories, another one that is a little more specific in what they eat are those that we call filter feeders. And what do you guys think would a filter feeder be when you think of this kind of behavior? Because again, it's not one that you're really going to see much of in clinic. For example, a humpback whale would be a filter feeder, and personal experience, I've never seen one in clinic, and I think it's very unlikely that you would see a humpback whale in clinic unless you start working as a marine biologist out in the water. But yeah, it is particles in the water. So predominantly these are aquatic species. They, again, this is why these kind of guys tend to only do one thing. Filter feeders, what other category do you think that they could fall into? Because they're separating food particles in water. So what other category could they fall into? How are they finding the food apart from just filtering this out? Yeah, they can be scavenging for it because they can be putting their heads underwater to find it. They will be foraging for it as well. You could also consider them grazers as well, because if you think of your swans, not only will they filter feed, but they'll climb out onto the bank and they will eat grasses and sedges. So they will also be foragers and grazers and filter feeders. So again, you can see that they fall into a lot of different categories. Yeah, killer whale will chase a baby whale, attack it and eat it. So that again would be a hunter and predator behavior, but they could also be considered a filter. They fall into many, many different categories. Generally, most filter feeders are going to be herbivores and omnivores because they eat planktons, algae, and aquatic plants. So they're gonna generally eat more of your greenery. So they will be your herbivores and your omnivores. You're not really going to get a carnivore that's a filter feeder because they're separating these food particles in water. But you've given a really good point there, Lindsay, about one way that what you would consider a normal behavior for a species may not be a normal behavior. So I am going to show you a video now, like I said earlier, that there's a bit of a discretion up there that some people may find this a little bit distressing. I personally find this an incredibly fascinating video. It is not an Australian animal. I do apologize, but because it is a tortoise. And the difference between a tortoise and turtles, I'm sure you know, but tortoises are those that are land dwelling, and tortoises generally are scavengers and they're omnivores. If it's on the ground in front of their face, they'll pick it up and they'll eat it. They're not fussy. It's food, I'll eat it. But there is a video of a tortoise that has displayed a very bizarre behavior that has never ever been seen before. And it just shows you how species can adapt and change and also fall into more than one category. So I'm going to play this video for you now. It's only 2 minutes. And then we can have a little discussion to see what you guys think of this video.
The tortoise then managed to reach the bird, and then it killed the bird, and the tortoise ate the bird. It was like late afternoon, maybe 5 o'clock. We just noticed one of those tortoises acting a little bit strange, stalking a bird, not yet fledged, so unable to fly. They went on like that for about 7 minutes. The tortoise wasn't just, try its luck, but it really was determined to get the bird. So we realized that really the tortoise was actively hunting. Tortoises are scavengers. They eat dead birds, they eat dead lizards, millipedes, and so on. But it was literally the first time that event was documented. When I realized what was happening, I thought, okay, I don't recall reading anything about that. Someone told me, do you realize that maybe you are the only person in the world who saw and documented that? And I said, no, I really didn't. Nature is cruel. When we do this kind of job, that's also what you sign for, So it's not all nice and pretty.
What do people think about that? I find it very, very interesting because it just shows you that, those that normally scavenge can hunt as well. And it has never been seen before. Tortoises are one of my favorite animals. I absolutely love them. I used to have 8 tortoises. And my tortoises would chase me around and try and eat my toes, which is always fun. And they're actually quite fast. Tortoises are not that slow. And yeah, it is upsetting because it is a baby bird, and if it wasn't a fledgling, it probably could have flown away and got away. But it couldn't fly, so it couldn't get away. And the tortoises, they really can be quite quick sometimes. I suppose the only upside to it for the poor bird is that it took 7 minutes for the tortoise to catch it, but when it did, that was a very quick and clean kill. But then the tortoise ate it. So when the last species you would ever think of as a hunter, really and a predator would be a tortoise. So it really, for me, is an incredibly fascinating thing to see, the evolvement of how a tortoise would do this. And yeah, tortoises will eat, if there's a dead bird on the floor, it will eat it. They scavenge, they'll just eat it. But they are generally quite kind of lazy and placid to bother hunting something down. So it really is a very fascinating video to be able to watch. And yeah, you're right, nature can be cruel, but animals have to eat. And if an animal doesn't hunt and doesn't eat, then it will starve to death. So it's again, this is why feeding behavior for me is very, very fascinating, because it go back to the Lion King again, it really is a circle of life. Animals have to eat other animals to survive. Same as humans, we don't have to eat meat, but a lot of people, we are natural omnivores. A lot of people choose to be vegetarian and vegan. A lot of people still choose to eat meat. And it's exactly the same with animals. They have to eat to survive. So it's it's a very fascinating world to kind of to delve into, and I hope it's shown you guys all the different ways that you thought this animal would literally just fall into this category. I hope that it's shown you that that is actually not quite right, and makes you think about, oh, okay, although this guy does hunt, it does also forage. You know, the pigeon that, you know, eats seeds. Wow, it's a seed predator. So I hope it's given you a little bit of more of an insight into those kind of things. And then I just wanted to end this just having a little bit of fun, because I like to have fun with these things, and just do a little bit of a pop quiz to see what category you guys think these may fall into. So they, we don't just have one answer, they may fall into others. So when you look at the Tassie devil up there, what category do you think this falls into? A, B, C, D, E, F. More than one. They couldn't easily fall into more than one. So what do you guys think a Tasmanian devil would be when you have a look at this? Just have a think. Scavenger, predator, yeah, scavenger, forager, yeah. So the Tasmanian devil I would put as a predator, a scavenger, and a forager. I'd put them in all three, because they go into all three. So yeah, predator, scavenger, yeah, perfect. And what about the pelican? These guys, again, they're going to be a little bit more kind of specific. So if you think about where the pelicans live and the way they eat, I'd probably put these guys into, a couple of categories. Filter feeder, yeah, is the first place I would put them. So I'd definitely put them as a filter feeder first. Then I would put them, yeah, as a scavenger and a forager. Could be a predator as well, because if they're filter feeding and they filter feed and they're eating seeds and things like that, then yes, they could also be classed as a predator. So they can fall into a fair few categories. Yeah, it's an ish. It's not, I wouldn't say they would predominantly be a predator. And they could be a predator just out of, coincidence that if an insect happens to be on the, algae that they're eating or something like that, then yeah, they could be a predator as well. Predominantly, they would be filter feeder first, then probably forager, scavenger, predator, grazer. They'd go into that. What about your snakes? Snakes are pretty straightforward when we think about snakes. Because you think about the category that snakes fall into as well, which predator, spot on. And if you think about predators and hunters and the way they find food, they do it differently. So a snake would be a predator that lays in wait. And then you'd get something like a lion, which is a predator that will physically hunt and chase down the food. Whereas snakes generally will mostly lay in wait and wait for the animal to come past. And those of you that were in my reptile talk the other day, remember the video of the snake where it did strike out at the human, which is very interesting. So again, these guys mostly would be classed as predators. But then, yes, I would put them potentially as a scavenger. If they were really, really hungry, a snake will scavenge. They would forage as well. Again, if they were really hungry and the food wasn't coming to them, they would go out and search for it. But predominantly, these guys are predators that lay in wait. But they will do the others if they need to. Cows? Would you guys think cows fall into? Yeah, it's an easy one. It's grazer. These guys are grazers. By account, because they graze, they forage, but predominantly these guys would graze. Goats, we've had a bit of a chat about goats earlier as well, who again I love. I mean, like the smile on that goat, like, how can you not love goats? So yeah, browser, and also they would fall under grazer. So these guys would fall into two. And by definition of that, they could also be a forager. So again, you can classify it as the predominant thing. So predominantly they would be browsers, then they would be grazers, and then they would be foragers. So they fall into three categories, but the main one, yeah, would be a browser. And then our last one here, which is a sugar glider. What is that going to fall into? What do you think? Again, there's a few right answers for this one. Yeah, forager, yeah. So these guys predominantly would be a forager and a browser. because they tend to live more, they're more of an arboreal species, so they'll live in the trees. They tend to eat leaves, offshoots, and fruits and berries. So they would be a browser and a forager predominantly, and fall into kind of the two different categories. So it just shows you that every species that earlier on perhaps you thought this is only a predator, now you know that it is more than that, and there are a few right answers that you can look at. So that's basically it for the end of me talking at you. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, a browser is predominantly those that live in trees or eat from trees. So goats would also be considered browsers, although you do get tree goats. Goats predominantly do live on the ground, but they're classed as browsers because they will eat leaves and shoots off the trees.